And many of you know me, some of you may not, or some of you may not have had me in classes. So most semesters I'm teaching a graduate class, but I guess this is an unusual semester because I'm not. But I think next semester I'm going to be teaching league groups, and so it's sometimes taught as 218, sometimes taught as Math 250, but it's a kind of a natural continuation of the manifolds course. And in fact, for about a week or two during the manifolds class, we'll be studying league groups, and so this is kind of an appropriate continuation in that respect. Okay. Am I taking students? Maybe. Okay. So, what do I want to talk about? Well, let's see. I was kind of wondering what I was going to talk about yesterday, but I think I've put together a little talk here. So, I'm going to talk about things that actually I've talked about with Christine more than anyone else, and she sort of knows a lot of this stuff, but I'd like to make you aware of sort of the Euclidean version of the kind of problem that Christine does, and why it's important and why it's interesting, that kind of thing. Okay, so none of this is really my own result because a lot of this is fairly classical in some sense, although I'll allude to sort of the kinds of things I'm also working on and my contribution to the subject, as it were. So, let's see. I don't know, Charlie, do you mind getting a box of chalk? I don't like short pieces.
Box of white?
Yeah, box of white, please. Thanks. So, I want to start by defining the mean value operator, or the mean value of a function. Okay. So, so let's take a function f continuous in Rn. So any old continuous function. Okay. And let's fix a real number r greater than 0. Then what I want to do is I want to average this function over spheres of radius r for fixed r. Okay? So the mean value mr of f is the function given by mrf of x is just the average of the values of f on a sphere of radius r centered at x. So this is equal to 1 over a of r, so this is the area of the sphere of radius r in Rn, times the integral of f of x plus 1 dy over s of r of x. So s of r of x being the sphere of radius r centered at x. And what is this a of r here? A of r is simply the area of any sphere of radius r in Euclidean space. So this is going to be omega sub n, r to the power n minus 1. So for instance, the area of a sphere in R3 is 4 pi r squared, right? Okay.
Is it always done in a Euclidean space?
Yeah, well, no. I mean, you can do this for a Riemannian manifold, for instance, right? There are lots of generalizations. But that's a good question. In any case, let's start with something that we're familiar with, which is Euclidean space, right? So this is omega n r to the n minus 1. And what is omega n is the area of the unit sphere in Euclidean space. So, for instance, when n is equal to 2, then this is just pi, right? Because the area, the area in R2 of the unit sphere is 2 pi r. Yeah, right. So this should be 2 pi. I'm sorry. Right. So omega sub n here is 2 pi to the n over 2 divided by gamma omega. I mean, this quantity that's easily calculated is just the area of the unit sphere. Okay. So what does this measure? It measures the average of f over a sphere of radius r. So here's x. Aha! Here's r. And so you just average over a sphere of radius r. Okay. And if r is fixed, then you get a new function, right? Function dependent on the center of the sphere. Okay? And I think we can interrupt this talk now and start eating. Because it's 20 minutes past 12. Okay. So this is the mean value of f. You can also write the mean value in the following way. This is equal to 1 over omega n times the integral of f of x plus r omega d omega over n minus 1 squared. So the integration takes place over all unit vectors, right? This represents here, as omega varies over all points on the unit sphere, okay? This represents all the points on the sphere of center x and radius r. And this, the omega here, is just the area measure of the unit sphere, okay? So this again represents the average of f. Now, there is a classical result regarding the mean value of a function, and the classical result is simply a characterization of harmonic functions. So, in fact, this is going to be our starting point. The classical result is this. That a function is harmonic if and only if it equals its mean values. In other words, a function is killed by the Laplacian if and only if on any sphere of any radius surrounding a point, then the average of the function is equal to the value of the function at the center. Okay? So,
the definition of harmonic?
No, well, harmonic means its function is killed by the Laplacian. So the classical result is this, a function f, and just to kind of, actually we can use C2 here. A function f in C2 of Rn is harmonic, and harmonic means that second partial with respect to x1 plus second partial with respect to xn of f is equal to 0. This quantity here, some of you are familiar with, this is the Laplace operator, right? So I'll call it L. L of f is equal to 0 if and only if the mean value of f around any sphere of any radius centered at x is equal to f of x. For all x in Rn and for all r greater than or equal to 0. You can include r equals 0 because sphere radius 0 is not from r. Okay, so it's trivial. Now, this is actually quite easy to prove, and you can prove this using vector calculus. Okay, you can explain this to a Math 13 student. Very, very easy. So, for example, let's just prove one direction, although you can reverse the arguments. And actually, unlike Boris's argument, you can reverse the arguments actually. Have an equally cogent argument in the opposite direction. So, let's just assume first that, so here's an example, okay? So this is the forward direction. So let's suppose that the function f is harmonic, okay? Now let's consider the mean value mrf. So fix x in Rn and consider this function as a function of r, say, okay? mrf of x. So we're fixing x, we're varying r, okay? And now we can show that mrf of x is equal to f of x if we can show that this is a constant in r. Because then you can let r go to 0, and therefore the average of f over any sphere of small radius is going to be the same. Therefore, as r goes to 0, you just get the value of f of x. So you just take the derivative with respect to r of this, and all you need to do is to prove that this is equal to 0, and you're done. Okay? Well, this is equal to the derivative with respect to r of 1 over omega n, so we'll substitute that expression for the mean value, integral f of x plus r omega, the omega over n minus 1 sphere. And now, you're differentiating with respect to r here. You can pull that differentiation inside. So this is equal to 1 over omega n. You can interchange the derivative and the integral here. So times the derivative with respect to r of f x plus omega, the omega over n minus 1 sphere. But you see, differentiating this with respect to r is exactly taking a radial derivative. Okay? Because you see, if this is x And this is r omega, where omega is a unit vector, then this is x plus r omega. Differentiating with respect to r is taking a radial derivative. So this is equal to 1 over omega n times the integral over the n minus 1 sphere of the normal derivative, which is same as the radial derivative, of f of x plus r omega, d omega over n minus 1 sphere. And now, what I'm going to do is, what's my laser here? I'm going to multiply, divide by r to the power n minus 1, so that I get 1 over omega n times r to the n minus 1 times the integral of the normal derivative of f x plus r omega times r to the n minus 1 d omega here over n minus 1 sphere. Now this is the area element of the sphere with center x and radius r. So I'm taking a normal derivative and integrating it with respect to the area element. Now what is this normal derivative? It is a directional derivative, right? It's a directional derivative in the direction pointing away from x. Any directional derivative by math 13 is the dot product of the gradient with the direction you're differentiating along. So this is nothing other than the gradient of f at x plus r omega dot the normal direction, which is precisely omega, right? Okay. Well, of what use is this? Well, you can apply here the divergence theorem because, right, we're taking the flux of the gradient of f, right? This is precisely the flux, okay, of this vector field. So therefore, by the divergence theorem, this is equal to, by the way, this denominator here is the area of a sphere of radius r. So this is 1 over a of r. And here we simply get the divergence of the gradient of f, right? So div del f evaluated over the whole ball, right? So we're applying from here to here the divergence theorem. The y here and y is taken over, the integral rather, is taken over all points in the ball of radius r centered at x. But now what is this? This is simply the Laplacian of f. And we're assuming that the function f is harmonic, therefore this whole integral is 0. So therefore the derivative of the mean value with respect to r is 0. So this is constant enough. And as I said, as you let r go to 0, you get f of x. So therefore this is the same as f of x. Okay? Now you can reverse these arguments and prove that if the mean values of any of the function over any sphere of radius r is equal to f, then f is harmonic. Okay? So just a little bit of vector calculus will allow you to prove this mean value result. By the way, for 2 dimensions, when n is equal to 2, this mean value property of harmonic functions is nothing other than a special case of the Cauchy integral formula. Okay? That's all. Because if you take a harmonic function of R2, then it's the real part, say, a holomorphic function, right? And if you apply the Cauchy integral formula and look at the real and imaginary parts of that equation, then you will get precisely the mean value property of harmonic function. So this is something that's actually familiar to us. Okay? Now, this result actually, with its proof, can also apply to Riemannian manifolds. Okay? So the mean value property of harmonic functions is essentially the same thing, at least for small radii applied to Riemannian manifolds. Now, one of the things that comes to mind, as a result of this, is how do you generalize this? How do you relax the hypothesis and so forth? Well, there are several directions. One direction is to think that maybe the mean value result is too strong, in the sense that we're looking at all possible radii r. So what if we restricted ourselves to 1 radius or 2 radius? In other words, or 2 radii. In other words, suppose that a function f is equal to its mean value over all spheres of 1 fixed radius. Then is the function harmonic? Okay? So this is one possible direction in which this result can be generalized. So fix r greater than 0. Okay? Is it true that f is harmonic? And just to avoid pathologies, we're going to assume that f is as differentiable as we want it to be. Okay? Is it true that the function f is harmonic if and only if f of x is equal to mr f of x for all this and for this fixed function? In other words, if you remove the condition for all radii r and just fix one radius, like 1 for example, is it true that f is harmonic if it's equal to its average over all spheres of radius 1? The answer is no, actually. It's no. Now, by the way, this if and only if one direction is always true. Okay? If f is harmonic, then by our proof, actually, the mean value of f is equal to f. It's the other direction. If f is equal to its mean value over all spheres of radius 1, is it harmonic? Answer is no. They're very simple examples, but I'd rather not go into them because they involve a little bit of calculation. Okay? This is related to the so-called Pompeiu problem, which is the following. Okay? Suppose that you have a continuous function, f of x on Rn, and suppose that its integral over all spheres of radius 1 is 0. Then is the function equal to 0? Answer is no. There are non-zero functions whose integral over all spheres is actually equal to 0. Okay. Now, so because one radius doesn't do it, how about two radii? Is it true that a function is harmonic if its integral over all spheres of, say, radius 1 and radius 2 equals, if its average over all spheres of radius 1 and radius 2 equals f of x? The answer turns out to be yes, in general. Okay? And this is a result that was proved by Delsart in the 50s. So Delsart's result looks like this. Okay? I'm talking about generalizations, of course, of the mean values property. Delsart's result is this. So I think this is in 52 or something like that. I'm not sure of the year. It goes like this. So fix R1, R2 greater than 0 if mR1 f of x is equal to mR2 f of x is equal to f of x for all x in Rn then f is harmonic. I should say R1 not equal to R2, then f is harmonic, provided R1 and R2 satisfy the following condition. R1 over R2 is not a zero of an appropriate Bessel function of j sub n minus 2 to the base. The Bessel function somehow occupies a special place in Euclidean harmonic analysis and appears in something else. Now, this actually is a mild condition because the zeros of the Bessel function are evenly spaced more or less along the real line. And so there's countably many of them. So for generically then, R1 over R2 is not a zero.
Is the converse of this theorem true?
If f is harmonic, then this is always true.
Not that converse. I'm saying that if R1 over R2 happens to be a zero Bessel function.
So the provided one is an if and only if. Okay? So if R1 over R2 is a zero for Bessel function, this is good question. So that's one possible direction of generalization. Another possible direction is this. What if you look instead, what if instead of harmonic functions, you look at eigenfunctions of the Laplacian? Harmonic function, after all, is a Laplacian, remember, is a linear operator, so you can talk about eigenvectors, right? Now, harmonic function is simply an eigenvector of 0. So therefore, what about other eigenvectors of other scalars, right? Does something like the mean value property hold? It turns out that it does, okay? So another possible way to generalize this is as follows. So So let's consider the eigenfunction relation, Laplacian of f equals minus lambda squared. Now, for various reasons, it is better to write eigenvalue this way. If we let lambda be a complex number, then minus lambda squared exhausts all complex numbers, right? So we can always represent a complex number this way. So we want to look at this eigenfunction relation and try to determine what sort of mean value properties a function satisfies eigenfunction relation satisfies. Well, it turns out that LF, so fixed lambda in C, then LF is minus lambda squared F, if and only if the mean value FR f of x is equal to J, let me call this J sub, well, this J of lambda R times x, where this function J of U say is equal to the Bessel function J sub n minus 2 over 2 of x divided by absolute value of x, rather just x with n minus 2. So this generalizes the mean value property of harmonic functions as well. Because if lambda is equal to 0, this J is just 1. So again, eigenfunctions of the Laplacian can be characterized by a mean value. Okay? And actually, this has generalizations not just to this has generalizations to homogeneous spaces as well, in particular symmetric spaces. Okay? So, and in order to prove something like this, you actually need group theory. There are Lie groups lurking all over the place here. Okay? The reason why is because the Laplacian is a differential operator that's invariant under rotations and translations. You automatically have a group action. This mean value operator is also invariant under taking rotations and translations. So if you invoke the group, you can prove something like this. Fairly straightforward. Now, the generalization of the mean value property of harmonic functions that I'm interested in is in another direction. And that generalization is called Gauss-Gerson's mean value theorem. Okay. Generalization actually allows us to solve, for instance, the wave equation in Euclidean space. So Gauss-Gerson's mean value theorem goes like this. So Gauss-Gerson is an Icelandic name, and it turns out Icelandic names are very interesting because it's not really a name. Okay, his first name is Leifur, and so his name is Leifur Gauss-Gerson. But you can't say that Gauss-Gerson is his last name. Okay, in Icelandic he is Gauss-Gerson. That means that he's the son of Asgir, or whatever the father's name is. Okay, but you can't say that his name is Gauss-Gerson. Okay, so there's that little distinction there. Anyway, Gauss-Gerson's mean value theorem goes like this. Okay. So suppose that I have a function of two arguments which are both points in Euclidean space. Okay? So suppose that h of xy is in C infinity of Rn plus 1. Okay. Then h of xy satisfies equal to hyperbolic differential equation and what is the ultra-hyperbolic equation? It is the following. Let us take the Laplacian of h of xy with respect to the first argument. So this is a point in Euclidean space. And let us assume that it's equal to the Laplacian with respect to the second argument. Same function. Okay. So suppose that h of xy satisfies the ultra-hyperbolic equation, then it follows, and this also goes the other way, that the mean value of h of xy with respect to the x variables is the same as the mean value of h of xy with respect to the y variables for fixed values. So the condition is that the integral of h of x plus cos omega, comma y, d omega over the n minus 1 sphere So you're averaging h of xy over a sphere with respect to the first argument is equal to the integral of h of x y plus r omega d omega over 1 by the
Okay,
So this is another generalization of the mean value property of harmonic functions.
do x and y both have to be an Rn?
Yes, because h is a function of Rn cross Rn. So x belongs to Rn, y belongs to Rn.
So you couldn't have h be a function of Rn cross Rn?
No. But that's an interesting question. Actually, I don't think that anything coherent can be done out of that. Although, as you can see, for the wave equation anyway, you're looking at a function of n-space variable and one-time variable. So therefore, how do you convert it to something like this? And I'll talk about it in a minute. Okay? In any case, you can see that it's not hard to see that this generalizes the mean value property of harmonic functions. Why? Because if f is harmonic, then you can always define a function of 2n arguments by letting h of xy be equal to f of x. So h of xy doesn't really depend on the y coordinate. Then, of course, this equation is going to be satisfied. Because f is harmonic, so therefore the Laplacian with respect to x of this is just the Laplacian of f, which is 0. And Laplacian with respect to y is 0 because h doesn't really depend on the y coordinates, right? And now this is going to be precisely the mean value property because the left-hand side represents the mean value of f, and the right-hand side, well, again, h doesn't depend on the y, so the integrand is going to be constant, and it's just going to be f of x, okay? Or omega n times f. In any case, this is another sort of generalization of the mean value property of harmonic functions.
What is hyperbolic about this equation?
Ultra-hyperbolic. So hyperbolic equation is essentially the wave equation. It's ultra-hyperbolic. So, for instance, you could have a function of R2 cross R2. The Laplace in respect to the two arguments in R2, the first two arguments equals Laplace with respect to the second one. Actually, I talked with a physicist not too long ago and asked him whether the ultra-hyperbolic equation occurs in nature, and he said no. So, doesn't quite do it, but there might be some relation. I don't know. Actually, this is used in, it does occur in mathematics a lot. So for instance, you can characterize, say, the range of the X-ray transform by means of ultra-hyperbolic differential equations. What is the X-ray transform? Well, it's a transform that integrates every function of R3, say, over all lines. Okay? Of course, you have to assume that the function is compactly supported or satisfies some decreased properties. But in any case, you can characterize the range of such a function by using this equation. Okay. Now, the proof of this is actually not difficult. Okay? But I don't really have time to go over it. Let me just say a few things about the result itself. Okay? This result has been generalized to rank 1 symmetric spaces. So these are special kind of symmetric space that's quite amenable to analysis. This result has also been generalized to symmetric spaces of arbitrary rank. So essentially arbitrary symmetric spaces, but with conditions of each. Okay? And it has not been generalized, or it's not known. I believe it's true though. So it's still an open question whether this holds in general for h in C infinity of x cross x, where x is a symmetric space. Okay, so it's not completely clear whether I certainly know that the proof doesn't exist yet in that general situation. Okay. Now, how does Gauss-Gerson's mean value theorem? So how does one apply it to solve the wave equation? Okay, so for this let's look at the initial value problem for the wave equation. Okay. So, by the way, just to backtrack a little bit. Okay, the proof of Gauss-Gerson's mean value theorem, let me just say, uses the following key point. The proof of theorem, the proof uses the key point. And this is the key point. It's called Darboux equation. And the Darboux equation goes like this. where is that? For the Darboux identity, it goes like this. Suppose that I take function f and take its Laplacian and take the mean value of that. Okay? It turns out that this is the same as the Laplacian of the mean value of f. So the Laplace operator commutes with the mean value operator. Okay? And moreover, I can replace the Laplace operator here, which is taken with respect to the center, with the Laplace operator, which is taken with respect to the radius. So it turns out that this latter expression here is the same as the second partial with respect to r plus n minus 1 over r times the partial with respect to r and r.
This is assuming f is harmonic or for any f?
No, any f.
Okay.
So, because if f were harmonic, this would be
Yeah.
zero. So for any f, this is always true. So the big takeaway here is that the mean value operator commutes with the Laplace operator. Actually, it turns out that the mean value operator is a power series in the Laplace operator. Okay? So if one accepts that, then obviously this holds. Very good. So now, how does one apply Haus-Gerson's mean value here to solve the wave equation? Well, for this, let's look at the initial value problem for the wave equation, which goes like this. Okay. The wave equation is as follows. You have a function u of n space variables and one time variable. So u of xt belongs to c infinity of Rn cross R. And then the wave equation is that Laplacian with respect to the space variables of u of xt is equal to 1 over c squared times the second partial of u of xt with respect.
It's the Tufts emergency test.
Really? Holy cow, what am I supposed to do?
Ignore it.
Ignore it, okay. Is it gonna ring twice more or something like that? Or?
It depends how many ways you've told them to contact you.
I didn't say anything.
I put in your phone number.
Oh, this is horrible. Okay, so here's the wave equation. Now, since this is actually, c here represents the speed of propagation of the wave. Since we're mathematicians, we're going to assume that that speed is 1. So this is the motion here. So this represents the motion of a wave, say u of xt representing the amplitude. And we're going to impose on this function u, which satisfies the wave equation, this moving wave here, some initial conditions. So we assume that u of x0 is equal to f of x, and the time derivative of u times 0 is equal to g of x. Okay? So these are the initial conditions. And so the question is, how do we solve the wave equation? Well, you see, if you look at this equation here, this is almost like the ultra-hyperbolic equation, right? Except, of course, in the ultra-hyperbolic equation, you have several variables in the second argument. So what do? You just add some dummy variables in order to make this the ultra-hyperbolic equation. And then use the mean value property and see what happens, right? So to solve this equation, we introduce a function v of x comma y of 2n arguments, say c infinity or something, of Rn cross Rn. So this is c infinity of Rn cross Rn maybe. Given by v x1, xn, y1 to yn is just u of x1 to xn, comma y1. So we introduce dummy variables. Then, of course, this function v here satisfies the ultra-hyperbolic equation, right? So then, Laplacian with respect to x of v of xy is equal to the Laplacian with respect to 1 of v of xy. And therefore, by Gauss-Gerson's mean value theorem, the mean value of B with respect to the first argument over any sphere of fixed radius is equal to the mean value of B over any sphere of the same fixed radius with respect to the second argument. So from here, we can conclude, using Gauss-Gerson's mean value theorem, that the mean value with respect to a sphere, say, of radius t, let's just see here, of B of x, y, with respect to the x argument, with respect to the first argument here, is equal to the mean value over a sphere of radius t with respect to the second argument of B of x, y.
Is t just a new variable, or is it supposed to?
It's just any number, any positive real number. It's just a radius, right? So instead of r, I'm going to use t because in the wave equation we're using the time variable. So I might as well replace r by t. Okay? And the thing is that if I let y be equal to 0, okay? If I let y be equal to 0, then of course v of x0 is f of x. Okay? It's going to be f of x. Now, since I'm taking mean value here with respect to the x variable, what happens on the left-hand side is that I'm simply taking the mean value of the initial function f of x over a sphere of radius t. So the left-hand side becomes, so if y is equal to 0, then m super t f of x is equal to this expression here, the mean value with respect to the y argument over a sphere of radius t of b of x comma 0. Okay? Now, the thing is that v of xy depends only on the first argument of y1. It doesn't depend on the last n minus 1 arguments. And so therefore, this mean value, which is taken over a sphere of radius t, is actually just an integral in one variable. Okay, namely the y1 variable. So if you do the conversions, okay, this becomes nothing other than something like, let me see now, omega sub, and here I'm probably going to be a little bit fuzzy on the constants. So omega n minus 1 over omega n times e to the 2 minus n times the integral of u of x comma t times, or rather s, t squared minus s squared to the n minus 3 over 2ds. So minus 3. Okay. So you simply get an integral with respect to one variable because, as I said, y depends only on the first variable, y1. Okay. So the spherical integral becomes just an integral with respect to one variable. And this is simply a weight that occurs when you do the integration within the sphere. Okay. Now, if you apply a similar equality, you see, if f satisfies Laplace, or rather, if u satisfies the wave equation, so does the time derivative u sub t satisfies the wave equation. So if you replace u by u sub t and apply the same argument, you're going to get a similar relation involving g. And now, you get two integral equations, and it's very easy to solve for u of x from these integral equations. You simply use standard techniques. Okay? So the end result is this. So I'm going to cut through a lot of calculations and simply give you solution to the wave equation. Looks like this, at least in even dimension, in odd dimensions. So n is odd. In even dimensions, the solution is slightly more complicated, but not that much more. So u of x t turns out to be equal to some constant times the n, so the derivative with respect to t composed with the derivative with respect to t squared to the n minus 3 over 2 of m, rather, t to the n minus 2 m d f of x plus the derivative with respect to t squared to the n minus 3 over 2 t to the n minus 2 m d. And And what exactly is the derivative with respect to t squared? Well, by the chain rule, this is nothing other than 1 over 2t. Okay. So the wave equation can be solved simply by taking appropriate mean values of initial data, f of x and g of x, and taking derivatives of them. And then you throw in this constant. This is a constant that depends only on the dimension of the space that you're dealing with. And that's it. Okay. Now, this particular theorem, Gauss-Gerson's mean value theorem, as I mentioned, extends to symmetric spaces. And the solution to the wave equation that utilizes Gauss-Gerson's mean value theorem also carries. Of course, the calculations are somewhat different, but the spirit of the thing is very nice. Okay, so I'll stop here.
That was a really complicated way to write cosine.
Cosine?
Wave solution to the wave equation.
No. For R, but not for Rn.
So I guess you didn't really. You pushed back my question earlier, like to a different question, which is why. Do you know why a solution to a wave equation is called hyperbolic in respect to other things in mathematics that are called hyperbolic?
Well, it's because let me see now. The characteristic polynomial is hyperbolic, right? In other words, the graph is hyperbola because the characteristic polynomial is x1 squared plus blah 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 plus xn squared minus t squared. And if you set that equal to constant, you get a hyperboloid of 1 sheet, 2 sheets, etc., or cone or whatever. So we call that hyperbolic. Actually, this type of solution also tells you a lot of things about the wave equation. Namely, for instance, it shows you that waves propagate with finite speed. In this particular case, unit speed. Okay. So if you have, there's a lot of things that can be said from the solution. And by the way, this is not the only possible solution that one can derive for the wave equation. There's also a solution based on Fourier transforms, a solution based on Radon transforms, and this mean value solution here. Now, on their face, the solutions look different. About 6 years ago, I thought, well, there must be something in the literature that allows one to go from one solution to another, because the solution to the wave equation is unique, actually, okay, by general properties of solutions to differential equations. Okay, and so is there any explicit calculation that relates to the solution? It turns out that it doesn't occur in the literature. I asked one of my undergraduate students to try to prove that one solution implies the other. It's actually a non-trivial calculation, and that was what he wrote his undergraduate thesis. It's actually quite a nice result. So, anyway, also sort of the wave equation satisfies certain properties. Like for instance, one such property is that waves propagate with finite speed. So for instance, if this is Rn, this is where your initial data lie, and suppose that f of x and g of x have support here on, say, a disk of radius epsilon, then the support of the solution to the wave equation lies in this cone here. And of course, you can go backward in time as well, so this is time pieces. In other words, outside the cone, the solution is 0, assuming that the initial data are supported here. Okay? Now, odd dimensions, actually, a very interesting phenomenon occurs. It's called Huygens principle, which says that, in fact, the solution occurs in a conical shape, okay, rather than just a solid cone. And what does that imply for the world that we live in? Well, we live in a three-dimensional spatial world. So that means that sounds and waves in general travel in a kind of a discrete packet in some sense, because you see, you're out here, say, okay, and you see, okay, you start here, okay, you're not hearing anything, somebody snaps their finger, and at a certain moment in time you hear it, and afterwards you don't hear it anymore. So, on the other hand, in even dimensions, that's not the case at all, because if n were even, then once you start hearing the sound of my finger snapping, you'll hear it continually, forever. Of course, the wave diminishes in intensity, but you hear it. So music in even dimensions is kind of strange. But in odd dimensions, it's good, because you can hear tones and then they will stop. So this difference between odd dimensions and even dimensions is called Huygens principle. And one of the consequences is that we're lucky to be living in R3.
that's and Poisson principle is only about large dimensions, right?
No. It's the difference between odd and even dimensions.
Right, but it's like
If you throw a rock in a pond, there will be an initial ripple, but there will be subsequent ripples.
and in 2 dimensions it doesn't, or sorry, in 3 dimensions it isn't just the intensity that is for.
No. Snap my finger, you hear it, and you don't hear it. So the sound wave is localized on a sphere or a spherical shell. In even dimensions, I snap my finger, there's an initial wave, but there's subsidiary waves. And this solution actually tells you that the solution to the wave equation in odd dimensions, I said n was odd, is localized to a spherical shell because you're just taking derivatives of mean value. In even dimensions, there's an integral here. Okay, I'm not going to keep you guys in there.
Wait, Fulton, before you go, what's your favorite math book?
Well, you know, when I was 9, well, my mother was a college teacher, and so I spent time at the university library. You know, and so this is how I got interested in math. This is kind of hokey, but there's a book series called The World of Mathematics by, I think, Donald Newman or something like that. And that was just a revelation, you know. I didn't understand practically anything, but, you know, I was amazed that you could kind of order the world through mathematics. And so, you know, I sort of decided that this is something that I want to learn about. And so, yeah, that got me started in mathematics. And so I think that's still my favorite book series. Yeah.
What's your favorite math textbook?
Aha. Well, I would still say that my advisor's book. Yeah. Well, he has 3, but I would say the last one. It's called Geometric Analysis on Symmetric Spaces. It's really beautiful. It takes a while to get started and so forth and so on. But once you get the once you get past the sort of initial impression of unreadability, what a beautiful book. And it's still my favorite book.
All right, I don't want to. Your office hour starts 7 minutes
Yeah,
ago,
yeah,
so
yeah.
we will let you go. So everyone, thank Fulton once again.